Hello, everybody. It's Miss Galanico, and I am back again with our second part of 7.3, and this is SPS 7C2. And in this case, we're going to be talking about measures of gender inequality. Now, with measures of gender inequality, we're talking specifically about the Gender Inequality Index. However, there is another type of measurement that is used by the UN, which is called the Gender Development Index, the GDI. And both of these are used to measure gender inequality across the world. And one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that there's been longstanding cultural and legal barriers that can limit women's participation in development and limit a country's overall development level because of existing cultural biases towards different genders. And it's something to be aware of here that the measures that we look at are binary, meaning that they look at the difference between males and females in a population, which can ignore or overlook people who are trans, non-binary, or gender fluid and lump them into a gendered category instead of looking at what happens to that segment of the population as well. And part of that is due to some countries not recognizing those groups of people as existing legally. And so that's one of the things that I would anticipate that we see changing in the future as it becomes more widespread and acknowledged within cultures across the world. So getting started, we're going to start by talking about the Gender Inequality Index itself. Now, the GII was established by the United Nations to measure inequality based on gender. And the higher the number in the GII, the greater the inequality in a country. So scores run from 0, meaning true equality, to 1, which would be the worst inequality possible in all factors. And developing countries as a group are around 0.468, while developed countries as a group are around 0.170. In different parts of the world, different factors cause higher scores than in other parts of the world. So it can be very difficult to get a clear idea about what's going on. And it is important to note that gender inequality is not a one-size-fit-all kind of situation. There are a lot of different things going on across the world that have to do with gender inequality and contribute to those scores. Now, the GII combines statistics on reproductive health. And it also looks at empowerment and labor market participation. So when we're looking at reproductive health, we're talking about maternal mortality rate and adolescent birth rates. So with looking at really cannot say that word. Let me try that a little bit slower. Maternal mortality rates, which would be the number of women who die giving birth per 100,000 live births, globally is at about 216 per 100,000. In developed countries as a group, the number is about 16 to 100,000, while it is closer to 171 per 100,000 in developing countries. And of course, this varies by actual country and region. Europe is 8 out of 100,000, while sub-Saharan Africa is more than 500 women per 100,000. The US, on the other hand, is one of the 13 countries in the world whose numbers have gone up since 1990, with 17.4 women per 100,000 births. And this is where that whole scale point comes in again, because even within that number, it depends on the racial and economic background of the mothers. And the highest rates of maternal mortality is in Black mothers, where the rate as of 2018 is 37.5 per 100,000. And for white mothers, it's 14.9. And for Hispanic mothers, it's 11.8. And this also varies by region and state within the United States. And so this is one of those points where it's really, really important to pay attention to scale of analysis because it varies so much within a country and within different populations within that country. But the overall outlook is positive because the numbers have declined by about half in the last 30 years. With adolescent birth rates, the number of births, which is the number of births per 100,000 women that are aged between 15 and 19. In developed countries, the number is 16 to 1,000, and in developing countries, it's about 48 to 1,000. The actual numbers, again, vary by region and country. The United States is at 21 per 1,000, and it is higher in the minority and high poverty communities than in others. When looking at empowerment, which is the second measure of GII, we're looking at things like voting rights, political representation in the national legislature, the ratio of female to male access to secondary education. Secondary education is high school and above. In most countries where women have voting rights, more women vote than men, but only in Bolivia, Cuba, and Rwanda does the national legislature have a majority of women. In parts of Europe, their legislatures are about a quarter female, while in Southwest Asia and North Africa, the representation is at its lowest. Worldwide, about 62% of women and 71% of men have completed some secondary schooling. Different areas have different rates. In the United States, for example, more women than men complete some high school. With the last measure, which is labor market participation, economic status and ratio of female to male participation in the labor market, which would be working, above the age of 15 is what is looked at. Worldwide, about 49% of women work outside the home compared to 75% of men. Women in developed countries are more likely to have jobs in the formal economy than in developing countries, where it's more common for them to be in the informal economy if they're working outside the home. And it's also worth looking into the type of jobs that women and men typically do, which the GII doesn't really look at. And that kind of gets us to what are some of the limits here. The limitations is that it doesn't really capture the breadth of gender inequality. Within the political measures, it's only looking at the national representation in government. So it's kind of ignoring the local representation or participation in non-governmental politics like school boards. And within the labor market data, it doesn't look at the quality of the work done. And unpaid labor like caregiving and housekeeping and childcare is left out. And that tends to fall on women more than men. So it's not giving us a complete picture, but it's a start in understanding what's going on. And we can see here on these maps here that it's showing us the adolescent fertility rate by 2018, and then the trend in maternal mortality rates between 1990 and 2015. And it's looking at decreases or in some cases increases in that data over time. So we can see that overall the maternal mortality rate is declining, and that adolescent fertility rate, depending on where you are in the world, is either very low or very high. All right, so that's going to take us to our next e-case. I'll be back with you shortly to pick up on our last part of 7.3.